This is Jim Bish with the Americans in Wartime Museum. Today's date is December 30th, 2019, and I'm conducting an interview with Ruth Berry in Sun City, Arizona. Ruth, could you give me your full name and where you were born?
Ruth Marie Hale was my maiden name. It's Berry now, and I was born and raised in Lamar, Missouri.
Okay. And did you grow up in Lamar?
Yes.
And you went to school there, graduate
Yes.
from high school in Lamar?
Yes.
How big is Lamar?
Maybe 4,000 people.
Yeah.
It's small.
When you, what year did you graduate from high school?
1967. Okay.
And when you graduated, obviously the Vietnam War was in the front page news every day.
Yes.
In 1967. How did you find your way from graduating in 1967 into, and I assume you were in the Air Force?
Yes, I was in the Air
How did you
Force.
find your way into the service?
I graduated in May of '67. The recruiter came to the high school, and he was speaking, and they were going to be scheduling people who wanted to join the service testing, and so I volunteered to take the testing, and I took the testing, and at that time I had my Uncle John was in the Navy, and my Uncle Tom was in the Navy, and my brother was in the Army, and my Uncle Jim was in the Marines. They all got drafted, the guys did. Mm-hmm. And so I guess me, being a competitive person, thought, well, if they could all go in, I should be able to go in. But it wasn't that easy for a woman to go in, or a young girl. I was 18 years old. Although I did well on the test, mm-hmm. My dad had to sign for me. My parents had to sign before I could get into the military.
Stepping back a little bit, was the recruiter, was he a general services recruiter, or was he specifically Air Force?
No, he was Army.
He was Army recruiter?
Yeah, he was Army. No, he was Air Force recruiter, because we had the Army come in, then they had the Air Force come in, and then they had the Navy come in mm-hmm. to the school, and they all were there giving their speeches and stuff. And
so how did you find your way in there? Had you graduate from high school, or was the plan already, the process starting before you graduated?
Yes, it was starting before I graduated. Uh-huh. I had taken the test, let's see, I think it was a month before I graduated. And then I didn't get called, or I didn't take the oath or anything until August. And so I took it. My dad reluctantly signed for me to go in.
Was he more opposed than your mother?
Yes, much more opposed than my mom. And so I got on the plane and left Kansas City and flew to Lackland Air Force Base when they called me.
Uh-huh. So everything was, you had your orders then to go to basics, and
yes, I took basic training at Lackland Air Force Base for 6 weeks, and then
I'm assuming that was segregated training.
No,
it wasn't.
No, it was not. The military was a lot different from then compared to today. Like I said, I couldn't have gotten in had not my parents signed for mm-hmm. me. And we had our WAF barracks when we went into basic training, and it was, nothing was segregated as far as men and women. I liked it that way. I think that it gave us more independence as women, young women, and not having that competition with the guys. So we were always separated. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, all the time that I was in, there was no...
They were on doing completely different things than what yes. you were doing?
Well, they were doing the same things we were doing.
But at different times and different places.
Right, different times, different places, because we were a WAF squadron and they were a male squadron. So it was different, but still the same.
Yeah. I'm assuming you were told all this ahead of time, what it was going to be like, basic training as far
No,
as
not
you coming in? Not necessarily?
No.
When
They were recruiting, but not heavily for women.
Yeah.
They were not, especially in the field that I went in. There was no big push for women to go in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were at Lackland. How long were you in basic training? Were you there for the full 8 weeks?
Yeah. Yeah, it was 6 weeks back then.
Or 6 weeks?
6 weeks at basic training. And then after basic training, I got sent to Shepherd Air Force Base for my technical training. And my MOS was a 391. I was a communications specialist. Then I got my, when I got my top secret clearance, then they sent me to Westover Air Force Base as a comm
So
center.
at Shepherd Air Force, that's where you were getting communications training? What are some of the things that you learned there that they were focusing on as far as communications?
As far as communications go, we had to read the tape. They had the machines and they had tape, small tape, and it had dots in it and everything, and we learned to read those because that's how the messages were coming in. And then we had to take training for a top secret clearance. We had to have training in regard to that. And then we got sent. We were taking the place of the guys that were in our field. They were all being sent to Vietnam. And so they needed us here to take up that slack. So that's what we were doing.
Was the school segregated or was it mixed? I assume you were with all kinds of different people in communications at that point.
When we went to class.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. When we went to class, there was guys and women in class, but we were still separated as far as we had our female barracks and we had the male barracks.
So the WAF barracks were still in place at the school as well?
Yep, and still was when I went permanent party at Westover. It was still segregated.
Did they
Thumbs up, it was a great idea.
did they do PT and everything? That was all segregated, all separated as far
Yes,
as
it
all
was.
your
It was
activity.
right.
Only things that were brought together and
Was
integrated was the schooling.
Yes, that was it, yeah. And other than that, we all marched. It was the WAF marched and then the males marched. And, we had our squadron, the WAF squadron, and then the male squadron. And we would maybe be in the same, when we marched, but we never marched with the men and the men never marched with us.
Yeah.
We would be here and they may be behind us.
Yeah. When you were in basics, did your WAF did that get split up into a variety of schools?
Yes.
A lot of your women did a number of the women go along with you in communications? No. You were about the only one that was that you
yeah,
had
at that
basics?
time there was only about 2 of us.
That were sent to that were sent to Shepherd Air Force Base.
Right. Yeah. A lot of them went into nursing, or they went into dental, or
some medical field related.
yeah, and more or less into that. There wasn't a whole lot of us into my field. When I got the FBI gave me my clearance, but they went to my hometown. And I can remember my mom called me and said, "Ruth Marie, what are you doing?" She said, "The FBI's been in this town talking to teachers and everything else. What is going on?" She was so scared. And then I had to explain to her, they were just getting my top secret clearance in for me. So not to worry. I'm okay.
How many women were at Shepherd Air Force Base in communications? Was it a pretty small group?
Yeah, I would say when I was in, there may have been 5 or 6 of us, you know, that went in at that point. The class was very, very small, but it was very good.
Yeah.
It was a really good class.
How long were you at Shepherd in communications
I
class?
was there for training. It was about 6 months, I believe it was.
So we're about almost to 1968 right now?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and then after that I got transferred to Westover.
And I'm assuming you were using your training at Westover. What did you do at Westover?
I was attached to the 1805th Support Squadron in their communications. I was working 12-hour days, 7 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that first year I couldn't go home for Christmas because there just wasn't enough of us to take over for the men that they were sending overseas.
Mm-hmm.
So we got our psychiatric evaluation. We had to get evaluated every year because of the field that we were in. We always had to get our psychiatric evaluation every year. So we'd go to work and we'd go into what they called the cave, and it was a room that they would send us in, and they would lock us in. We couldn't get out, or no one could get in. And that's how I met Joe. Joe was guarding our door, and during work, and we played war. And whenever we played war, depending on where you were at, if you were at work, you would stay at work until after we got finished playing war. And he was one of our guards, and that's how we had met.
So when you left to go to Westover, I'm assuming coming out of school at Shepherd, you were on leave for a little while. You went back home before
Yes, I had.
Was that around Christmas time, or was that another time of the year?
That was in November. Well, what was that? Right after I got out of tech school, then I went home, and I had 2 weeks, and then I got sent, and then I went straight to Westover.
Mm-hmm. And then at Westover, you were basically starting to fill in the roles of men that were in communications. You were trying to take those over.
Right.
And so what are some of the things that you did there as far as communication when you were in the cave? What were you, what was communications? What was your job?
We would get messages from Vietnam and places like that would come into the system, and we would type them out, read the messages, type them out, send them to wherever. We would send them out front to the officers and stuff like that. It would be orders, it would be things that had happened over there, and usually the news had them before we did, but it was that kind of things, that you couldn't talk about.
Yeah, so these are messages coming in from officers?
Everywhere, yes. From Vietnam mainly, yeah, and they were coming into.
And your job was to translate.
Yeah, we would decode them.
Read, decode, and then type, and then pass them forward.
Yeah, they were all done. The secret and top secret messages were done in crypto, and we had to learn crypto. So when we learned that, then those messages would come in that way, and then we would decipher them.
So that's why your top secret clearances had to be enforced before you were sent there for the job that you were doing.
Right.
You mentioned earlier about a lot of the top news broadcasts had the information before you did. Could you explain that, and what do you think about? What was your thoughts about that? How the news was just traveling?
Right. It was like, well, how did they get it? We just got it.
Yeah.
So it was like, how did they possibly get this information when we just got it into our office? You know, we would talk about it. Well, we figured they knew somebody somewhere that was saying, you know, this is what, maybe it was the reporters that were over there already, you know, and they got back to the news media faster than what we could get our stuff.
And that was happening pretty much throughout the time you were working there?
Yeah, that was happening. We would also, every once in a while, they would send people to Dover Air Force Base because that's where Good. Come on, Ruth. That's where the bodies would come. And I can remember.
So you had to deal with the deceased, the messages concerning that as well?
And you always hoped there was no one on that list that you knew.
Yeah.
You know, it was hard. It was really hard. I mean, they were yay long.
Of the personnel coming back to Dover?
The dead bodies.
Yeah.
They were coming back. They would fly into Dover. And we would have to take those messages were coming into our center. And then we would have to get the list out, and then they would notify their
next of kin.
My wife worked in casualties during the Desert Storm War. She was in Alexandria, and that's one of the things they had to deal with. But there was very few casualties in the Desert Storm War back in the early 90s. It was almost casualty free. But they were always amazed with, because they would learn things on CNN that hadn't even reached them yet.
Right.
You know, that's being reported.
You just, you know, I remember the first time I went home, we had to wear our uniforms because we were traveling under the government, and we had to wear our uniforms. And I was going through the airport, and sure enough, someone spit on me as I was walking by. They were standing up, and I was walking by and stuff, you know, and it was hard to deal with because I still felt we were doing something right, you know.
Yeah.
I may not have agreed with it and everything, but I still felt, I know I was only 18 and 19 years old, but I still felt I was doing something right. And I had uncles and a brother and me. We were all together,
Right.
you know, we were all scattered out. The guys went to Vietnam and stuff, and we were all scattered out. But, you know, it was hard.
Yeah.
It was hard to do.
Did you have much communication with any of your uncles or your brother while you were in the service?
Yes,
Was that easier for you to communicate since you were in communication?
Right, it was because I could get I had Audubon line, so we could get anywhere in the United States. Well, my Uncle Jim, who is a month older than me, was in the Marines, and my brother at the time was over in Germany getting ready to go to Vietnam. And he called me and he said that my uncle had gotten shot, and he was in the hospital over in Vietnam. And I was able to call him Jim, and I was able to talk to him while he was over there and stuff. So I tried to keep track of the guys. It's hard when they're on ships, and then when they're one is in one place and one is in the other. But yeah, I was fortunate enough that I was able to keep track of the guys.
Yeah. I had a brother-in-law that was in communications in Vietnam. He was in the Army. And that's what advantage he had too, because he could call home and connect with a lot more people just because of his clearances and what he was doing than most people were. So we were able to keep track of him much better.
You had that Audubon line, and you could call home. And we would have guys from Goose Bay, Labrador that would call and say, "Can you get me home?" And we would use that. We even had guys call us from ships and wanting us to hook them up so they could call home, you know. So we said, well, we'll do it, but you only got so many minutes. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
So
Did you have to communicate where there was a death in the family in the States to try to communicate, or was that totally out of your realm of
that
area?
was out of my realm
Because you
of
were dealing
area.
more with officers and orders and
Right.
things like that.
Yeah.
So I'm sure, I know that there were some people that were involved with that too. You know,
Yeah.
letting people know if there was things going on.
Yeah, no, we would just pass that information on once a plane hit Dover, and then they were unloading the bodies and everything and making the list. Well, then we got that list, and then we just passed it on to the proper authorities that go out to
Yeah.
the families.
How long were you working in the cave at?
We worked 12 hours a
Russell.
day.
And it's 5 days a week, 6 days a week?
7.
7 days a week.
Yeah, there just wasn't enough of us, you know, so, and I think that was the main reason we all had to take psychiatric evaluation is because of the hours and the type of field and things that we were in.
Yeah.
And the material that you were
Yeah,
in.
and the material and stuff.
And what are some of the things that stand out to you that you still remember today as far as unusual, or you've already mentioned about Dover, so that
Right,
those are some
yeah.
hard messages, but is there any
oh.
unique things that came through you that
Yes, when President Nixon would come to the base, and his daughter was going to Amherst College that was just up the road from the base, and he would fly in, and it was always, he flew in for his birthday one time, and it was the security and everything that, and it involved us too. You know, we had to make sure that the communications was open and everything was there in case we were needed or whatever. But that was, when President Nixon would come in, it put a lot of us on alert. You know, everybody was on alert, and everybody had to be at work, and just in case something was gonna, you just never knew. So that was interesting. A lot of work, but it was interesting.
did he only come there once, or was it maybe a few times while you were
He
there?
came there a couple of times. He came to the base, and Julie, I think it was Julie
Yeah.
that was at Amherst, going to Amherst at the time. And so he'd fly in and drive out and fly back.
Was there any things that were going on in Vietnam that were major news that came through your office while you were there that you can remember?
No, because it seemed intense most of the time, you know, because we always had something coming in, always coming in. You know, we would be in the cave, and then when we would get that information, everything, we would automatically go out the door and give it to people in the front so they could dispense or do with it whatever had to be done. But yeah, just, you know.
How many were working in the cave at one time? And how many were female versus male?
Okay, there was about 6 of us in the cave at the time, and most of us were women. There was 1, maybe 2 guys at the most. Yeah. And
Your entire time there?
yes.
That's about what it was.
Yeah.
And when you were working there, did you guys, because I know the military generally at that time period, they would bring people in and bring people out, you know, on a year's worth of service or whatever when their service time was. Were people constantly coming in, like did you come into it alone at Westover?
Yeah, I came in alone. Yeah, right.
And then some people were leaving the time you came
Right.
in, and that kind of just gradually shuffled in.
As they got more of us trained and coming in, yeah, I would, we would flip around.
You would be rotating in and
Yeah.
out.
But our hours were from 12 midnight to 12 noon, and we could never figure out why they picked 12 midnight to 12 noon. It just didn't make any sense as far as work hours went, but that was what we were always working, 12 noon to 12 midnight, and for
Guess it was
whatever
about
reason.
12 midnight to 12 noon there. I bet in Vietnam, but
Yeah, that's true.
The time zone Vietnam
Yeah.
to Westover.
It didn't work for us though.
Yeah.
We didn't like it.
I can imagine those would be rough. Those would be rough working hours. You know, from
Right.
midnight to noon.
It was.
Kind of messes up
It
with your
does.
personal mental clock.
See, we still had our female squadron, and then we had our male squadron.
Mm-hmm.
And our male squadron was our duty squadron. And then the female squadron, that was where the barracks we stayed in, and then we would have to do KP or whatever. And that was all dealt through our female squadron, and then duty was our male squadron. So we were always shuffling between one and between the other. You know, we were always dealing. We had Lieutenant and Sergeant Majeka was our officer, and she was our first sergeant. And then Joe's squadron was our male squadron. And so anything that had to do with work or anything like that, we had to go through them.
Mm-hmm.
But then where we stayed, and when we had to do QC or what, you know, we would do our female squadron.
Mm-hmm.
So we were always balancing back and forth between the two.
Yeah. Did you ever find any problems being a female in the Air Force at that time?
Yeah.
Other than more shuffling, but
you know, it was hard at times because of the respect. Sometimes you didn't get a lot of respect from your male counterparts. You know, I don't know if it was just the time period that it was in, and sometimes you really had to be tough, you know. And I grew up and was raised on a farm and stuff, so I think that sort of gave me a little bit of toughness, but then at the same time, you could get worn down really easy. You know, when you're working those hours and everything, you get worn down.
it's a lot of hours.
Yeah.
84 hours a week, every day.
Every day, yeah.
Did they give you any breaks, 2 or 3 days off during a month, or?
Not at
Working.
first. Not at first. I remember we were working, I think we had worked over 7 months, I think it was, something like that. And they said, okay, you're going to have a weekend. So we were like, oh my gosh, you're kidding. So some of us girls, there was about 5 of us, we took off and we went to Boston. And we went to the naval base there and toured the USS Constitution and stuff there at the naval base. And stuff. But it was well needed. We needed a change.
Productivity, of course, you said they were short of manpower.
Right.
But productivity really drops when you're working that many hours a week. It would be much more
does.
refreshing if you had a break every week or something, you know, just
Right,
a little bit
and
of time.
there's not a lot of women during that period that volunteered, and of
Right.
course the women, it was all volunteer, you know.
Yeah.
There was no drafting, no nothing, so they didn't have that group to pick from, you know. So but then again, you did it, you know. It was one of those things that you got to get it done, so you did it.
Yeah.
Then,
Everybody else was doing it just like you.
yes, you know, we were all in the same boat.
Yeah.
We were all doing.
Did you find, other than your husband, was there some strong relationships with some of the women that you
Yes,
were working
very
with?
much so. I know my roommate and I were on Charlie shift because our shifts were divided and stuff. So we were on Charlie shift. So I miss them, and I wonder to this day, you know, what are they doing, or what happened to them, or, you know, what are they up to, and did they have any children and stuff. You do wonder, you know. And Jackie Cup, she was from
Iowa.
yeah, Iowa, and so those.
Were they were there a lot of Midwestern presence
Yes.
among the
Yes.
people there?
A lot of Midwestern. Yeah, Jackie was from there, and yeah, we were. Never thought of it at the time. There was some girls from California, and then there were some girls from Texas,
Mhm.
and then I was from Missouri, and then Iowa, and,
Mhm.
but not a lot.
Yeah. So how long were you stationed there then?
I was stationed there for over a year. And then Joe and I got married while we were in the Air Force. And then Joe got out, and they wouldn't let me stay in. And I never could understand that. You know, it was, well, just let me stay in. There was Air Force Base in Kansas City. And so I said, well, just transfer me there. And they wouldn't do it at that time. And now they've gotten a little bit smarter and letting ladies stay in,
Right.
you know, and getting their money's worth from them and stuff. But back then that was not something that they would do. You know, if you're married or whatever and your husband's getting out, you know, they wouldn't let you stay in.
Were all the girls not married then that were working with you?
No, not all of them were married yet.
But if they were married and were married to an Air Force personnel, they were still in the Air Force. The male was.
Yeah,
There was-
they could still stay in, right? Yeah, it was that thing. I don't know what it was. When I got out and we moved to Kansas City, I wanted to go on my GI Bill, and they wouldn't let me because I was married. So they said, you know, we're not going to let you do that. So I had to go through that, and then finally I got approved to go on my GI Bill. But back then, women, you might have been in the Air Force and you might have gotten married, but if you got out of the service, it wasn't easy for you to get your GI Bill. And I did finally get my GI Bill, and then I got my degree and stuff on it. But that was one of the things I had to fight for when I got out.
Interesting. I'm not.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, I couldn't believe it. I thought, no, that's one of my benefits. I was supposed to have that
So,
GI Bill.
Did you have to get some politically involved people involved
Yeah,
to make sure
I
you had
had
it?
to fill out a lot of paperwork, and then they would send it back and say you were denied, and then I'd have to go back in again, and then you just had to be persistent, I guess. And then they finally said you've been approved for your, and it was the same way with you know, the GI to buy a home. You on your GI Bill,
Right.
you know, that was another thing. You know, so they said, well, you're married, and you're married to a GI or everything. Yeah, but you know, that was supposed to be another one of my benefits when I got it. And that was another thing that I had to deal with.
Is the VA any problems today? Do you see any differences? Or do you know anything
Well, I
between?
just think they're a lot more lenient nowadays. You know, I mean, a lot of years have passed since then to the present day, and I got out, and it was the times. It just was the times. You know, those.
Yeah, you were on the early
Yes.
cusp of women coming in,
Right.
armed forces in larger numbers.
Right, and stuff, and it was just a matter of times, and so
Yeah.
you were just as persistent as they were, is what you had to be.
So when your service time was pretty much severed when Joe, your
Yes.
husband, got out of the service, then
I never understand that.
when that happened, I should say from that time until now, have you, other than trying to get the GI Bill, you know, and the benefits of that, how do you feel your service in the Air Force, has that been a benefit to you in your
Yeah, I
last
never
40,
regret,
50
and I
years?
would do it all over again. I would do it all over again. It was a learning experience for me. It was travel for me, but yet it was security for me, because I knew I was always going to have a roof over my head, and I knew I was always going to have something to eat, and then I knew I was going to get some training although the training that I got while I was in the military did not help me at all when I got out. It wasn't
much-
beneficial.
Not much use for crypto.
No, and so
Yeah.
it wasn't beneficial to me at all. But I would I would do it over again. I never ever regret it. Like I said, I learned a lot, and I grew up a lot. I was only 18 when I went in, so I had a lot of growing up to do yet.
Yeah.
You know, so but the military was good to me in a lot of ways, and in other ways, it made me a better person. I think I had good friends. I met people from all over that I would have probably never ever got to do
Yeah.
had I not left and got into the military and stuff. And I just never regret it. I
Being from a smaller town, and I can say this because I was from a smaller town too. Being from a smaller town in Missouri, did a lot of your classmates stay around there and didn't have
Oh,
that
yeah.
ability to go out and see the world like you did?
And I was sort of blackballed for going into the military. I mean, they thought, oh my goodness, you know, she's going into the military. And they didn't think of me as a good person or whatever. Oh, you know, she's going in the military, you know, so she must be going in the military for one reason. There's a lot of men in the military or whatever, not that you go into them. But that was the mentality back then, you know. And my mom said that was the same mentality in World War II. And she was not in the military, but she said growing up, that's what it was. And that carried on into Vietnam.
Yeah.
You know, it never changed until lately.
Or I'm sure there's still incidents.
Yeah.
Last question or so. Is there anything that you especially liked with your service in the Air Force, with your job, or anything that sticks out?
I liked my job, and I liked the people that I met, and I carry good memories from it. And if a young woman came up to me and said that's what she was going to do, I would say go for it, because there is a lot to be learned and a lot of people to meet that you would probably never ever meet.
Oh yeah.
And I just loved that part of it, you know. And I loved the training. I liked basic training, you know. I mean, I didn't particularly like in basic training fielding cigarettes because I didn't smoke, but we would have to go out and strip cigarette butts. I had never done anything with them. What do you mean strip cigarette butts? I was like, never heard of that before. I don't smoke. Well, it doesn't make any difference that you don't smoke. There's cigarette butts out there and they have to be stripped, you know. So we'd have to go out and do things like that, you know. And I would...
Just for the listener and myself, what is stripping cigarette butts?
Sorry?
stripping cigarette butts,
Yeah.
they would smoke, you know, and they'd throw the butts
on the floor,
ground.
yeah.
Right, so we would have, and they were filtered ones.
Yeah.
So we would have to strip the filter where they would you just strip them and then there was no more cigarette butts.
Okay. Just so it would dissolve and whatever.
Right, you know, you were like, we were going out and then we were having to do that. I always questioned, like I questioned that. Well, why are we doing that? We aren't smoking, you know, that doesn't make any sense or whatever. And sometimes that would get me in more trouble. You know, well, why? Why? You know, we'll just do it.
Yeah.
But why? So, but I was one of those type of people. I would just always ask, why are we
from
doing
Missouri.
this? You know, and but it did me good. It did. I like I say, I would never. I don't regret it. I don't regret one iota minute of it. I learned a lot.
Well, thank you very much for interviewing
Yeah,
Ruth, and
thank
thank you for your
you.
service.
Uh-huh.